to the Space Marketing Podcast, where we look at marketing principles, strategies, and tactics through the lens of space. Information relating to our discussion today and links to the video version can be found in the episode's show notes on spacemarketingpodcast.com. Please like and follow the podcast wherever you listen. It will help get the word out about space. Hi, I am your host, Izzy, and we are continuing our journey through the space industries as we explore businesses and their marketing strategies. I am now creating a third book about space industries. There are so many industries that are just starting to blossom. And if you're like me, it is really interesting to learn all about the cool stuff that is happening related to space right now, and more importantly, what is going to happen in the future. A few weeks ago, I led a panel of marketing experts at the Space Tourism Conference. I had the pleasure of meeting Melissa Roth. She was a guest on another panel that focused on space manufacturing and mining, and I was intrigued. She represents yet another industry in space. Melissa Roth is co-owner and lead researcher at Off Planet Research, providing mission assurance for space-based technology through the use of representative simulants, hardware development and testing, and consulting. They have received several NASA SBIR grants to develop dust-tolerant technologies. With her background in mechanical engineering, Melissa works with clients to ensure researchers and engineers get the best simulant for their testing to help them learn how to survive and thrive in some of the harshest environments in our solar system. She is a member of the LEAG Commercial Advisory Board and the lead for LSIC's Extreme Environment Regolith and Surface Interface Subgroup. My goodness, that's a mouthful. What an impressive bio. Well, welcome to the podcast, Melissa. I started off with a little bit of the intro, but one of the things that we wanted to talk about is can you build on what the intro said and tell us a little bit more about Off-Planet Research and what they do?
Our goal is really to approach testing from a holistic standpoint, and honestly technology development as well. And so we wanted to start with the ground floor of the building before we start constructing levels 1 and 2. And back in the mid-2010s, there really weren't simulants that were currently in production and available, and test facilities were also quite limited. And so we said, let's start there. That's an important part of the engineering design process. And so really we try to approach simulants as engineered test materials. And so how is this soil, replicated lunar soil, going to interact in different systems, different experiments, and what can we do regarding the different properties or how it's made to help emulate different properties from actual lunar regolith. So some are a little bit easier in a terrestrial environment than others, and so we try and work with clients to figure out which simulants might be best suited for their work.
Well, and I actually have some simulant here. So this is artificial regolith. And why don't we talk a little bit about why that's so important? Because it's more than just soil. And what's the difference between a lunar soil and Earth soil? So there's some very distinct differences, obviously, beyond the obvious.
I think the thing that most people think of when they think of Earth soil often has to do with the feel of it, the look of it. And on the lunar surface, it is just rocky material. There isn't any of those microbes or plant life or that a lot of moisture, unless you're off in the desert. I'm based here in Washington. Our soil is going to look a little bit different. And so, because everything on the lunar surface is made through impact processes and it doesn't have the same kind of environmental effects that are going to smooth around the edges, from eons of water and wind, the particles end up being very abrasive, very angular, and they're also quite fine. A lot of the particles are finer than cake flour. And so you have this very interesting material that not only behaves differently when you're trying to flow it through systems or you're trying to take core samples, but it is also going to really degrade and wear down whatever it is coming in contact with. So we saw that with astronauts' boots. We saw that with the tools they were trying to use to get samples. We saw it coating instruments, the suits, the rovers, and causing overheating. So it's a very different material than what we have here on Earth. And so really we look at how can we emulate certain characteristics. So when it comes to the angularity and the size, that has to do with a lot how you produce it. And traditional production methods for reducing particles to very fine sizes actually ends up rounding them or contributing high levels of contamination in most cases. And so really looking at ways we can get around that in order to achieve a better product is something that we're very passionate about, as well as obviously sourcing the material from representative sites. Well, obviously we can't really source it from the lunar environment, and so where can we find similar materials or as similar materials as we can here on Earth? So we actually source one of our materials from northern Canada, practically where Santa is, and the other one we get from Arizona, and both of those have been recognized as good sources for lunar simulants due to their chemistry and mineralogy and whatnot.
And you need to practice in order to here on planet before we can actually do it up there. We don't want to find out something doesn't work when we're 250,000 miles away. So it's very important for people that are researching moon technologies.
Definitely, yes. The hardware store would be quite a journey to undertake if you break down. And we again saw that during Apollo, where you only have the supplies with you that you thought to bring. And so, what can you do with those supplies to say fix the fender on Apollo 17, where it broke off after the first EVA? Gene Cernan's had an instrument, I think it was a hammer, get stuck and it just popped off. Well, if they hadn't been able to fix that, everything would have gotten doused, like just rained on with regolith for the other EVAs, and it would have made them challenging, if not impossible. And so think of all that could have been lost if they hadn't been able to come up with a design to kind of replace that fender overnight while the astronauts slept. That was the only geologist that has set foot on the moon, and they discovered some orange glassy material around Shorty Crater. I think it was during the second EVA, and gathered so many different samples and explored new regions. And so that's where I think being able to have that mission assurance, being able to succeed on your mission, you know that the equipment is ruggedized and able to survive in the harsh environment, is something that we're very passionate about, because we want to help missions succeed or exceed their mission goals, and try and gather all the information that they can or accomplish the tasks that they set out to do.
And we can't use the lunar soil and bring it back down here, because there's rules about doing that, because we don't want to contaminate things down here. So we have to create those environments here.
Yes, there was some samples were returned from Apollo, and then from the Roscosmos missions, and most recently from Chang'e, but in very, very small quantities. And so with all of the research that has been done in the last 50 years, let alone the last, few, there isn't enough test material that can be utilized, and especially for processes that are either early on in development or are going to be destructive. They're going to have a hard time getting their hands on any lunar soil, let alone a quantity that would be reasonable enough for them to use. So oftentimes, if you do want to conduct research with lunar soils, and ask the NASA Curation Office or your home country's curation system for a sample, they actually want you to do research ahead of time with simulants, and help prove that you know what you're doing, that you're going to get meaningful results, and that the use of that the use of that lunar soil will be for bettering the knowledge of the community. And so, yes, it's very restricted, and so that's why lunar simulants can kind of help bridge that gap to help organizations conduct research or testing to prepare prior to launch.
Well, and you're one of the founders, correct? Of the
I am, yes.
The off-planet research. And so what actually made you decide, we need to do this? Let's do this. I mean, how did you get there, and why did you choose to start?
Yeah, so my background is actually in mechanical engineering, and I am literally in Boeing's backyard. So I was going to be an aerospace engineer. I was going to go into aviation and had done some internships at a local MRO in the area. And then I found out about this project, and I really liked the idea of being able to utilize engineering and testing to really help enable a wide range of not only technologies and research, but also across a wide range of industries. So like you said, that your simulant was used for agricultural work. And there is a growing amount of that happening, which is really exciting, because any sustained presence in space, let alone on the lunar surface, you're going to need to have substrate to grow your food in, or some agricultural method. But you also have folks and organizations that are developing optical systems and cameras and solar panels, rovers, habitats. At the conference where we met, we had a doctor who was talking about the effects of space on the human body. Well, she was also talking about how might this material affect the human body long term as well. The lunar regolith was very hard on the astronauts, because they never came in contact with it directly on the lunar surface, but they definitely came in contact with it in the lunar habitat, just because of the state the suits were in when they came back in. And so, there's all these questions that we're still trying to answer, those strategic knowledge gaps, as they call them. And so if we can start to answer some of them now, or at least kind of get closer to those answers, then hopefully we'll be better prepared when we get to the lunar surface and can really start to gain more of an understanding of this other world.
And what challenges, as a business owner, and a scientist, what challenges have you come across, throughout your career?
Yeah, so I think that question. It's not uncommon, and this it was a broad question, and I know I've been veering off topic from everyone you've asked.
You're okay.
But
okay.
We'll see what we can do. Challenges.
Yep. Well, and how about marketing challenges? We'll just get a little bit fine-tuned, because
marketing ties into a lot. Definitely. And I think that is the thing about the space industry, that until you're in it, you don't 100% understand. And that's why venture capitalists has been something that's kind of been hard for the industry until recently to kind of get support for. That's because space is hard, but it also takes time. You're not going to have from conception to product in 6 months, or if you do, that is incredible. It's going to be a multi-year, in some cases multi-decade endeavor. And so I think that is something that can be hard for a variety of issues, from marketing to funding to getting employees on board and enthusiastic, to getting the community on board and enthusiastic. And I think that's something that we have seen previously as well, is great support and interest that can wane over time. So how can we as an industry make space exciting, make space relevant for all of the advantages that technologies can offer to humanity here on Earth. And really keep people engaged. And so from the marketing perspective, I think that is where, people like me that are engineers need those experts, need that expertise to not only market our products, but market why they're important and why they play into that larger space ecosystem. And so it is an interesting conundrum, and I think we're as an industry getting better at it, but it's taken a little bit of time, and so it'll be very interesting to see how we proceed because of this interest in being in space long term and exploring, nearby as well as far away.
Well, and on the flip side, we need people like you that are engineers to help us as marketers also spread the word about space, because you have an entire generation that needs to be excited about it, and they need to see people that are in the industry thriving and doing exciting stuff in order for them to grab a hold of the fire and take the torch when the time, because it's like you said, it's a multi-decade endeavor. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. It hasn't. We're 60 years now.
Definitely. And I think that, as I mentioned earlier, that is where it can actually get pretty exciting, is space is so interdisciplinary. Everything that we're doing down here is going to have some role in space as well. We're going to need the John Deere of the moon. We're going to need the Collins of the moon. We're going to need to have different structures, different architecture. We're going to need to have medical supplies. We're going to need to have hardware stores. I just wait for the day that we have little Evas wandering around like in WALL-E that can help fix things, both here as well as there. I think that would be very interesting. But the point being that, we're going to have to get really creative, because we can't just transport everything wherever humanity decides to go in space. It's going to need to be optimized. It's going to need to be refined and highly reliable. And those are all things that then have great value here as well.
Hold on to your boosters. We will be right back with guest Melissa Roth from Off Planet Research after a brief message from our sponsors. Please like and subscribe to the Space Marketing Podcast wherever you listen. Well, and we have to create it up there, in situ is what they call it, and be able to, in order to be able to go past the moon and go deeper into the planets and the universe, because we can't tow our planet behind us as much as we would love to.
That would be quite the engineering feat for sure. But no, in situ resource utilization, or ISRU, has really become a major part of the discussion because of the commercial potential it can provide to help close a lot of those gaps between the technology side and the business plan, the business model side. And so in situ resource utilization is essentially the idea of living off the land or utilizing the resources that exist where you are or where you want to go. And so, as you said, they can be used for propellant. It can also be used for drinking water. It can be used for breathable oxygen. It can be used to extract metals. There's some rare earth elements that are on the moon in an unrefined state. And so there would be even interest in potentially bringing those back to the lunar surface for use in computer chips. Just think about in the pandemic how long it took to get a cell phone, and that's because there were shortages. And so there's a lot of interest in various regions of our solar system or even beyond there for the types of resources they can provide, both for space activities as well as even some of them coming back to Earth. And so it is a really interesting concept, and that's where the lunar environment that I mentioned that's so challenging to operate in, let alone survive long term, if we can really solve some of those problems, then we can really optimize our time on those other planetary bodies through the use of resources. So I know there's also a lot of folks that are talking about moving certain types of manufacturing off of Earth. And so really trying to strike the balance between making our planet better and healthier, while also being aware of what we might be doing to these other planetary bodies. So that is a larger discussion that, again,
Yes.
I think is happening in the industry, and I think it's happening at a good time, but is also somewhat controversial, depending on where your interests lie.
Well, and it's a very delicate balance. So how can we stimulate growth and reach further at the same time taking care of how we do that? But if we don't do that, then we're actually jeopardizing where we are, because a lot of how we take care of our planet is dependent upon what we do in space. All that technology helps us clean our water, clean our air, and we're able to see things that we could not see from down here on Terra. So it's a very important balance. We just got to make sure we don't take our bad habits with us. So, but
exactly.
Now, as far
Let's learn from the errors of our past.
Yes, and future, because we're still doing quite a few of them. So we need to stop. And But what exactly, when a customer comes to your company, what exactly are they looking for, and how is it that you help them?
That honestly don't know a whole lot about simulant. And I've noticed that this has changed over the last few years. I think the industry as a whole is really starting to think about technology more, as well as earlier in their development process. And so sometimes it's somewhat educational, trying to explain what some of the different products and services we offer are. And then trying to get some information from space companies about what they're doing, so then we can make recommendations as appropriate, which is sometimes in and of itself an interesting conversation. And we try and be respectful of the fact that a lot of space companies don't want to tell you what they're doing. A lot of them might not even be publicly out as a space company. And so really trying to be respectful of that. And we get it ourselves. We're also a space company developing some technology, but working with them to ask what's important, what properties matter the most. Are you looking at mechanical properties? Are you looking at chemical? Are you going to be conducting specific type of research that might affect what particle size distribution, what size of the particles you want? If you're doing certain types of research, do you want additives included, or are they actually going to not be beneficial for your work or cause kind of skewed results? And so those are kind of some of the conversations we have, depending on the work our clients are doing, or even the stage of development that they're at in their process, to really kind of get them with the best material. We do offer a range of general simulants, but we also do quite a bit of customization, or even specialty simulants, like those with increased magnetic response or those with agglutinates, which we kind of describe as like the angry Cheerios of space. They're created by micrometeorite impacts on the lunar surface. And, we don't have that here, because any micrometeorites get, dissolved in our atmosphere. But kind of think about like the Grand Canyon or different canyons that we have here that were obviously big meteorites, just on a much smaller scale on the lunar surface. So anyway, I digress, but we really like to talk to the clients and see what they're doing, and help them decide which simulant might be best suited for their work. And sometimes it also goes as far as, how is the simulant going to be used? If you have humidity in your test environment, the simulant's going to act very differently than if you don't have humidity and the simulant has been baked. But when you bake the simulant, you don't want to go too hot or you start to alter it. Also safety concerns with fine abrasive particles. So, we try to tailor the conversations depending on what the client wants to know, needs to know, and is willing to listen to.
Well, and education-based marketing is my favorite, is because it leaves the audience, the person you're having the conversation with, it leaves them better than when you found them. So education is very important. In my first book, I actually wrote about the challenge with secrecy. And a lot of technology, we don't want to share it because obviously there are those that will take it and copy it illegally. So that is a problem. But if you don't tell anybody you exist, then how can you be successful? So it's a very fine balance. And a great example that I use is the Apollo program. They educated the American public on what rockets were. But obviously we weren't going to give any secrets away because we were going against the Russians at the time, in the space race. So we didn't want to give them any of our technology, but we still had to educate the American public so that they would support us. If you don't market, you don't exist, and you need to exist. So it's a very delicate balance. How have you actually handled some of that challenge? How have you been able to get your company promoted without giving away too much?
Well, and I mean, you really hit the nail on the head. It is challenging. And so we kind of have different policies, I guess you could say, depending on what it is that we're talking about. So certain processes, in fact, all of our processes that we use to create our simulants are proprietary. We do go into a little bit of information to kind of describe how we made the simulants and the types of properties we're emulating. And then obviously doing a lot of quality control and external testing to really help say, this is what the product can do. Again, going back to wanting to make sure that it is appropriate for different use cases. But I think when it comes to more the technology side, which we haven't discussed too much, is where it does get really challenging. So we're getting back to our engineering roots the last few years, and we've used our experience developing and working with simulants the last 6-7 years, I think it is, to create some dust-tolerant mechanisms, such as dust seals and removable covers, dust covers. And I think that is the challenge when you're in development specifically. And we were fortunate to get some NASA SBIR grants. Well, at what point, are you confident in your technology to be able to talk about it? And I think that is why we get a lot of hesitation from clients wanting to talk about their work. I'm like, you don't need to tell me anything specifically, but are you doing ISRU? If you're doing ISRU, are you flowing it through a system or are you melting it? Like even just broad strokes can be helpful for us, but I'm sure can be helpful for other individuals as well. So knowing who your client base is, looking for that beachhead customer, and you're developing that minimum viable product. Can you tell I've been through some I-Core trainings before? Anyway, really looking for some of those opportunities to be able to talk about your work and get feedback is really important, even in the early stages. So yes, I don't have an answer for you because we're still figuring it out ourselves, but it is something that we're very aware of, and we want to be as open as we can. I'd like to say, ask me a question and I'll very comfortably tell you if I can or can't answer it, and we can go from there.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so in our crystal ball, where do you see the next 10 to 15 years? Where do you see the space industry going?
Yeah, so I am kind of thinking planetary. Where are we going planetary? And I would love at the end of 10 years to have regular land admissions. Now, what type of land admissions? That's harder to say. Because I do think sometimes folks are very pessimistic or optimistic, and so let's be realistic. If we can have regular landings on other planets that are accomplishing science or commercial goals at the end of the decade, and that's happening regularly and successfully, I would be happy. Now, in 10 years, I hope we can be a little bit further than that. I hope we can have the starts of space tourism, because I think that is going to be a wonderful way to get that support from folks, but also keep the humanity to it, like we discussed. I know that Frank White's The Overview Effect has been a big topic with all of these suborbital flights that have been occurring. And so I think that is going to be an important aspect, is keeping that humanity and keeping that human engagement through space tourism or other opportunities. So I know we have flights going around the moon, definitely within the next decade, but it'd be very cool to have some landed tourism flights as well. And then I'd also love to see our ability to explore other planetary bodies, such as Mars, such as asteroids, maybe even doing flybys of other planetary bodies as well, for the potential to do visits beyond the decade. So that is my very broad but hopefully realistic take on the crystal ball.
Well, and the flybys, I hope, will be by the end of the year. That is the plan, but we will see how SpaceX develops the Starship. That is a very powerful rocket, and I think it was a little bit more powerful than they expected. So hopefully that will happen.
I was just going to say, I'm very interested to see that power then on another planetary body, and what sort of infrastructure are you going to need in order to not create similar or potentially worse craters on other surfaces.
Yeah, we can't be doing that. No, and let's touch back on the regolith part of it. If you try to do that on the moon, you're going to have some severe problems with all that powder, and it's going to create quite a bit. So we have to get that toned down a little bit.
Well, and I don't know if I've heard officially that was the reason for some of the engine failures on the Starship launch. But I can't imagine that there wasn't some flying debris causing some form of damage. And so that's going to be an issue regardless of the size of the rocket, whether it's even some of the smaller CLPS landers or the international landers. But with Starship, I think it would especially be concerned, not just for, the lander itself taking off, but for anything that is in the vicinity. So if you set up instruments or ground stations that are meant to stay there post return to Earth, you want to make sure that they survive the launch as well. Or even landing. That's something that, a lot of folks are talking about, putting instruments or optical systems on the bottom side of these landers. And so how will they even survive descent? A lot of landers tend to turn off a little bit above the surface to avoid some of that plume effect. But is it going to be early enough? What sort of damage might there be to the underside? And then, yes, definitely during takeoff. I think that'll be an interesting consideration for a lot of these companies.
Yes, definitely. But it's going to be a wild ride regardless. So, okay, one final question. What thoughts do you want to leave our audience with today as they go about their day? What kind of residual thinking do you want them to take with them?
Yeah, well, I think as you said, touching on that educational standpoint, one thing that we are really passionate about is, as I said, really just making sure folks understand what they're getting when they get simulants or any form of test material, and how it's going to interact with their system. And so that is something that we're working on and are always happy to answer questions about. But really thinking about the testing process and what we can simulate and what we need to have as a variable or an unknown because of testing here on testing here on Earth for the lunar surface. And yeah, I'm excited though. As I said, I think I was maybe a little cautious in my 10-year goals, but I do foresee a lot of fun activity and a lot of knowledge gained going forward.
And there's a lot of good people in the industry that really want us to go about space in a different way. You know, you're always going to have your characters, and but all in all, the most of the people that are inspired by space want to make things better. They don't want to, they don't want to destroy, so they want to create. And that's one of the reasons why I love the space industry as a whole, and that's why I've chosen to be in it. And so how can people contact you if they want to know more about your company, if they want to get involved, and how do they reach out to you?
Yeah, so a lot of folks come through our website and the contact page. That's why it's there. Is mostly for folks interested in getting simulant. But we're also available on LinkedIn. Or do you usually give out emails through here?
I can put them in the show notes if you would like, but that's purely up to you.
We'll put an email in the show note.
All
okay,
right.
yeah, those are the best ways to get a hold of us, are on social media or our website.
Sounds good. So, well, thank you so much for joining us today and in enlightening us in Moon Regolith and everything that you guys are doing to make it to where we can succeed and go off planet. A special thanks to Melissa Roth from Off Planet Research for sharing her journey to space. Be sure to check out her links listed in today's show notes. Please like and subscribe to the Space Marketing Podcast to help get the word out about space. I hope that you have found this podcast useful for your journey as you reach for the stars.